when widowed wheelwright Samuel Morrison fixed a broken stagecoach for an elegant stranger in 1867 Kansas. He had no idea the mysterious woman in emerald silk was actually railroad heiress Victoria Hartwellworth, more than his entire dusty frontier town. But when Victoria shocked everyone by choosing his calloused hands over her family fortune, would their love survive the powerful forces determined to tear them apart? The crack of Samuel Morrison's hammer against red-hot iron rang out like a gunshot through the sweltering Kansas heat, each strike sending sparks dancing across his weathered face. It was July 15th, 1867, and the frontier town of Millbrook baked under a merciless sun that seemed determined to turn every piece of metal in his workshop into a branding iron. Samuel paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, his calloused hands trembling slightly, reminder of the fever that had swept through town 3 winters ago, taking his beloved wife Margaret and leaving him to raise 7-year-old Emma alone. "Papa, you're shaking again," Emma observed from her perch on an overturned wooden crate, her corn-husk doll clutched protectively in her small arms. She had learned to watch for signs of her father's episodes, the way his left hand would tremble when he was tired or worried. "Just the heat, little sparrow," Samuel lied gently, setting down his hammer and reaching for the water bucket. The cool liquid felt like heaven against his parched throat, but it did nothing to ease the deeper thirst, the longing for companionship that had settled in his chest like a stone. Their workshop sat at the edge of Millbrook's Main Street, a dusty thoroughfare that connected the Kansas Pacific Railroad depot to the handful of businesses that kept the town alive. Most days, Samuel's customers were local farmers needing wagon repairs or the occasional traveling merchant with a broken wheel. The work was honest, but barely paid enough to keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. "Tell me again about the places the stagecoach goes," Emma said, her young voice filled with the kind of wonder that only children possess. She loved hearing stories about the wider world beyond their small town, places where ladies wore silk dresses and gentlemen carried gold pocket watches. Samuel smiled despite his exhaustion. "Well, the Butterfield stage comes through here twice a week, carrying passengers from Kansas City all the way to Denver. Some folks are heading west to find gold. Others are running from troubles back east. Do you think any of them are running towards something good instead of away from something bad?" Emma asked her question, carrying more wisdom than her years should have allowed. Before Samuel could answer, the thunder of hoofbeats and the creaking of leather harnesses announced the arrival of the afternoon stage. Through the open doorway of his shop, Samuel could see the familiar dust cloud approaching, but something was wrong. The stage was moving too fast, swaying dangerously from side to side as the driver fought to maintain control. "Get back, Emma!" Samuel shouted, pushing his daughter behind a stack of iron bars as the stagecoach careened past their workshop. The sound of splintering wood and the horse's panicked whinnying filled the air as the vehicle came to a violent stop just 50 yards down the street. Samuel grabbed his tool bag and ran toward the disabled coach, his bootmaker's instincts taking over. The left rear wheel hung at an impossible angle, its wooden spokes shattered like kindling. The axle had snapped clean through, leaving the coach tilted precariously to one side. "Everyone all right in there?" Samuel called out, approaching the passenger compartment cautiously. The door swung open, and a vision in emerald green silk stepped down onto the dusty street with surprising grace, considering the chaos that had just occurred. She was unlike any woman Samuel had ever seen in Millbrook, tall and elegant, with golden hair pinned up in a style that spoke of eastern cities and fine breeding. Her traveling dress, though now wrinkled from the journey, was made of fabric that probably cost more than Samuel earned in a month. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with sharp interest rather than the disdain he might have expected from someone of her obvious station. "I believe we've had what you might call a catastrophic failure," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone who had received the finest education money could buy. Despite the circumstances, there was a hint of amusement in her tone that Samuel found unexpectedly appealing. "Yes, ma'am. I'd say that's about right," Samuel replied, circling the damaged coach to assess the full extent of the problem. The more he examined the wreckage, the more serious it appeared. This wasn't a simple repair that could be completed in a few hours. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Pete Hawkins, whom Samuel had known for years, climbed down from his perch with a stream of colorful language that made Samuel glance nervously toward where Emma was watching from the workshop doorway. "Sam, this is about as bad as it gets," Pete said, shaking his head in disgust. "That axle's busted right through the housing. I've seen a lot of wrecks in my time, but this one's going to need a complete rebuild." The elegant passenger, who still hadn't offered her name, walked around the coach with Samuel, her practiced eye taking in details that surprised him. Most wealthy travelers knew nothing about the mechanical workings of their transportation, but this woman seemed genuinely interested in understanding what had gone wrong. "How long might such repairs require?" she asked, pulling off her fine leather gloves as if preparing to help with the work herself. Samuel ran his hand along the broken axle, feeling the rough edges where the metal had snapped under stress. 2 days at the very least, maybe 3. "I'll need to forge new parts, reset the entire wheel assembly, and test everything before it's safe to carry passengers again." He watched her face carefully, expecting to see the frustration and impatience that usually accompanied such news when delivered to people accustomed to having their problems solved quickly with money. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like relief cross her features. "I see," she said quietly, looking down the dusty main street of Millbrook with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than disappointment. "And what accommodations might be available for a stranded traveler?" "There's Mrs. Henderson's boarding house," Samuel offered, though he felt obligated to add, "though it's not what someone of your background might be accustomed to." The woman's laugh was warm and genuine, completely free of the artificial politeness he might have expected. "My background has been rather thoroughly disrupted today, it seems. Perhaps a change of accommodations is exactly what I need." The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the dusty streets of Millbrook in shades of gold and amber as Victoria Hartwell, though she had yet to reveal her name to the kind, wheelwright found herself in the most unusual situation of her 25 years. Standing in the doorway of Samuel Morrison's modest workshop, she watched him work with an intensity that had nothing to do with mere curiosity about mechanical repairs. "Mama used to say that watching Papa work was like watching magic," Emma said softly, appearing at Victoria's elbow with the quiet way children have of materializing when adults least expect them. "She said his hands could make broken things whole again." Victoria felt her heart clench at the child's words, hearing the note of loss that Emma probably didn't even realize she was expressing. "Your mama sounds like she was a very wise woman. She was the prettiest lady in all of Kansas," Emma continued, settling onto her favorite crate to watch her father shape heated metal with precise, powerful strikes. "Papa says I have her eyes, but I think I have his stubborn chin." Despite everything weighing on her mind, the confrontation with her father before she'd fled Philadelphia, the arranged marriage she was desperately trying to escape, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Victoria found herself smiling at Emma's matter-of-fact assessment of her own features. "Stubborn chins can be quite useful," Victoria said seriously. "They help you stand up for what matters." Samuel glanced up from his work, catching the exchange between his daughter and the mysterious stranger. Something in the woman's voice when she spoke to Emma made him pause mid-strike. There was a gentleness there that seemed genuine, not the calculated charm he'd observed in the few wealthy travelers who had passed through Millbrook over the years. "Emma, why don't you show our guest where she might wash up before supper?" Samuel suggested, though he immediately worried that the offer might seem presumptuous. "That is, if you'd care to join us. It's nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but you're welcome to share what we have." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest at the simple invitation. In her world of elaborate dinner parties and carefully orchestrated social events, genuine hospitality had become as rare as honesty. Here was a man offering to share his modest meal with a complete stranger, asking nothing in return except perhaps the pleasure of her company. "I would be honored," she said, meaning it more than she had meant anything in months. As Emma led her toward the small cabin behind the workshop, Victoria caught sight of the simple but tidy interior through the open door. Everything spoke of careful economy furniture that had been mended multiple times, clothes that had been patched with loving precision, books that had been read so often their pages were soft with handling. Yet there was something about the space that felt more like home than her father's mansion in Philadelphia ever had. "Papa built our table himself," Emma announced proudly, running her small hand along the smooth wooden surface. "He says it's not fancy, but it's strong enough to last forever." Victoria examined the table more closely, noting the careful joinery and the way the wood had been polished to a warm glow. "It's beautiful work. Your father is very skilled. He can fix anything," Emma said with the absolute confidence that children have in their parents. "Well, almost anything. He couldn't fix Mama when she got sick, but he says some things are too big for anyone to fix." The matter-of-fact way Emma spoke about her mother's death broke Victoria's heart. She had never experienced real loss-sheltered life had protected her from the harsh realities that people like Samuel and Emma faced every day. Yet here was this child, dealing with tragedy, with a strength that put Victoria's own struggles into perspective. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his face and hands scrubbed clean but his work clothes still bearing the honest stains of his trade. "I hope you don't mind simple fare," he said, ladling beans from a pot that hung over the fire. "We don't often have company for meals." "Simple fare sounds perfect," Victoria replied, accepting the tin plate he offered her. The beans were seasoned, with just a touch of salt pork and herbs, and the cornbread was golden and still warm from the oven. She couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. As they ate, Emma chattered about her day, the books she was reading, the wildflowers she'd picked for their table, the baby rabbits she'd spotted near the creek. Samuel listened with the patient attention of a father who cherished every word his daughter spoke, occasionally asking questions that encouraged her to elaborate on her observations. "You're a very good listener," Victoria observed, watching the easy interaction between father and daughter. "Emma's got interesting things to say," Samuel replied simply. "Most folks are, if you give them the chance." Victoria felt a pang of recognition at his words. In her world, conversation was often a performance, a carefully orchestrated dance of wit and social positioning. Here, listening seemed to be an act of love rather than a social skill. "What about you?" Samuel asked, turning his attention to Victoria. "What brings you to Kansas? Besides the broken stagecoach, I mean." Victoria hesitated, unsure how much truth she was ready to reveal. "I was traveling west," she said carefully, "looking for a change of scenery." Samuel nodded, seeming to understand that there was more to her story than she was willing to share. Sometimes a person needs to put some distance between themselves and whatever they're leaving behind. "Yes," Victoria said quietly, "sometimes they do." As the evening wore on, Victoria found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in months. There was something about the simple rhythm of their conversation, the way Emma curled up against her father's side as he read aloud from a well-worn book of poetry, that made her feel as if she'd stumbled into a world where pretense was unnecessary. "I should probably head to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house," Victoria said eventually, though she was reluctant to leave the warmth of their small cabin. "It's getting dark," Samuel observed, glancing toward the window where the last light of day was fading. "Emma, why don't you walk with Miss?" "I'm sorry, I don't believe you've told us your name." Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. She had been so careful to avoid revealing her identity, knowing that the Hartwell name would change everything. But looking into Samuel's honest eyes, she felt the weight of deception settling uncomfortably on her shoulders. "Victoria," she said, offering only her first name as a compromise with her conscience. "My name is Victoria." "Well then, Miss Victoria," Samuel said with a smile that transformed his weathered features, "Emma can show you the way to the boarding house. But I hope you'll consider joining us for breakfast tomorrow. I'd like to start work on your coach first thing, and I might need to ask you some questions about the repairs." As Victoria followed Emma through the quiet streets of Millbrook, she felt as if she was walking through a dream. The simple kindness of Samuel and his daughter had touched something deep inside her that she hadn't even realized was there. For the first time in her life, she had been valued, not for her father's wealth or her social connections, but simply for herself. But as they reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, Victoria caught sight of a familiar figure in the shadows across the street, a man in expensive clothes whose presence could only mean one thing. Her father had found her. Victoria's blood turned to ice water in her veins as she recognized the silhouette lurking near the general store. Her father's most trusted enforcer, Marcus Webb, had somehow tracked her to this remote Kansas town. The man's expensive suit and polished boots marked him as clearly out of place among the simple frontier folk as a peacock among sparrows. Yet there he stood, patient as a spider waiting for its prey to stumble into the web. "Miss Victoria, are you feeling poorly?" Emma asked, her young voice filled with concern as she noticed Victoria had stopped walking entirely. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Victoria whispered, her mind racing through possibilities. How had Webb found her so quickly? She had been so careful to cover her tracks, paying cash for her ticket and using her middle name when purchasing passage on the westbound stage. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her father's railroad connection stretched across the entire frontier. Of course, he would have been notified the moment a passenger matching her description had boarded any stage heading west. Emma tugged gently at Victoria's sleeve, her innocent touch bringing Victoria back to the present moment. "Mrs. Henderson makes the best apple pie in 3 counties, the child said, clearly trying to cheer up her new friend. "Maybe she'll give you an extra slice if you tell her you helped Papa with his work today." Victoria forced herself to smile, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "That sounds wonderful, Emma. You'd better run home to your father. No, it's getting quite dark." As Emma skipped away into the gathering twilight, Victoria steeled herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Sure enough, Webb stepped out of the shadows with the predatory grace that had made him invaluable to her father's business dealings. Men like Webb didn't ask polite questions or make reasonable requests. They simply took what they had been sent to collect. "Miss Hartwell," Webb's voice carried the smooth menace of oil on water, "your father has been extremely worried about your sudden departure from Philadelphia. He sent me to ensure your safe return home." "I'm perfectly safe here, thank you," Victoria replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "And I have no intention of returning to Philadelphia." Webb's thin smile held no warmth whatsoever. "I'm afraid that's not your decision to make, miss. Your father has made arrangements for your immediate transport back east. There's a private car attached to tomorrow morning's eastbound train." Victoria felt the trap closing around her with suffocating efficiency. Her father had always been thorough in his business dealings, and apparently he applied the same ruthless precision to managing his rebellious daughter. But something had changed during her brief time in Millbrook. She had tasted freedom, experienced genuine kindness, and discovered that there were people in the world who valued her for reasons that had nothing to do with her inheritance. "What if I refuse to go?" Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Webb's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slightly toward the inside of his jacket, a gesture that spoke volumes about the methods he was prepared to employ. "Your father anticipated that possibility. He's prepared to be quite persuasive in his arguments for your return." The boarding house door opened behind Victoria, spilling warm yellow light onto the dusty street. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her matronly figure backlit by the oil lamps within. "Victoria, dear, are you coming in? I've got your room all ready, and there's still some stew warming on the stove." Webb stepped back into the shadows at the interruption, but Victoria could feel his presence like a cold weight pressing against her shoulders. She managed to maintain her composure as she followed Mrs. Henderson inside, but her mind was already working frantically to devise some means of escape. The boarding house was exactly what Victoria had expected, clean but spare, with the kind of practical furnishings that prioritized function over beauty. Mrs. Henderson led her up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves, chattering cheerfully about the weather and the upcoming harvest festival. "You're welcome to join us for breakfast at 6, Mrs. Henderson said, setting a pitcher of water on the washstand. "Most of our guests prefer to get an early start on their travels." Victoria nodded and smiled, playing the part of a grateful traveler while her thoughts churned with desperate possibilities. Once Mrs. Henderson departed, Victoria moved to the small window and peered through the lace curtains. Webb was still there, now positioned where he could watch both the front and back entrances to the boarding house. Her father had trained his enforcer well. There would be no simple escape under cover of darkness. Meanwhile, across town in the Morrison cabin, Samuel was experiencing his own moment of revelation as he tucked Emma into her narrow bed. His daughter's innocent questions about their dinner guest had stirred something in his heart that he'd thought dead and buried with his beloved Margaret. "Papa, do you think Miss Victoria will stay in Millbrook for a while?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with hope in the lamplight. Samuel considered the question carefully, remembering the way Victoria had listened to Emma's chatter with genuine interest, the grace with which she had accepted their simple meal, the mysterious sadness that seemed to shadow her green eyes. "I think Miss Victoria has troubles of her own to sort through, little sparrow. Folks like her don't usually stay long in places like this." "But what if she wanted to stay?" Emma persisted with the relentless logic of childhood. "What if she liked it here?" Samuel felt his heart skip a beat at the possibility his daughter was suggesting. He had spent 3 long years convinced that his chance for companionship had died with Margaret, that his duty was simply to raise Emma as best he could and find what contentment he might in honest work. But tonight, sharing their simple meal with Victoria, he had glimpsed something he'd thought lost forever: the possibility of connection, of building something beautiful with another person. "Well," Samuel said carefully, tucking the quilt around Emma's small shoulders, "I suppose if Miss Victoria wanted to stay, we'd make her welcome. But wanting to stay and being able to stay are 2 different things." Emma's brow furrowed with the concentration of someone working through a complex problem. "What do you mean, Papa?" Samuel struggled to find words that would explain the harsh realities of social class and economic disparity to his 7-year-old daughter. Sometimes people have responsibilities or obligations that take them away from places they might want to be. Miss Victoria is a lady of quality. She's got family and connections back east that probably expect her to return. But what if she doesn't want to go back? Emma asked with the devastating directness that only children possess. Samuel felt his chest tighten with emotion. He wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "Then I suppose she'll have to decide what matters most to her, what other people expect, or what makes her happy." As he extinguished the oil lamp and made his way to his own simple bed, Samuel found himself hoping, against all reasonable expectation, that Victoria might choose happiness. But experience had taught him that people of wealth and breeding rarely chose the difficult path of genuine connection over the easy comfort of social convention. Back at the boarding house, Victoria lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to the night sounds of the frontier town. Somewhere in the darkness, Webb was watching and waiting, ready to drag her back to a life of gilded captivity and arranged marriage. But here, in this simple room above Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, Victoria felt more alive than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning. She could feel it approaching, like a storm on the horizon. But tonight, for the first time in her privileged life, Victoria Hartwell was preparing to fight for something that truly mattered to her. The question was whether she had the courage to see that fight through to its conclusion, whatever the cost might be. Dawn broke over Millbrook like a crimson promise, painting the dusty streets in shades of hope and warning, as Victoria pressed herself against her boarding house window, watching Samuel's workshop come to life in the early morning light. She had not slept thou, could she, knowing that Webb lurked somewhere in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to complete his mission and drag her back to Philadelphia like a runaway child. Samuel emerged from his cabin, stretching his arms toward the rising sun, and Victoria felt her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. There was something about the man's quiet strength, his gentle way with Emma, his honest pride in his work, that called to a part of her soul she hadn't even known existed. For 25 years, she had been surrounded by men who saw her as a prize to be won, a connection to be exploited, a fortune to be married. Samuel Morrison was the first man who had ever looked at her and seen simply Victoria. "You're up early, dear," Mrs. Henderson observed, bustling into the room with a breakfast tray that filled the air with the scents of fresh biscuits and honey. Most travelers prefer to sleep late after the trials of the road. I've always been an early riser, Victoria lied smoothly, accepting the food though her stomach churned with nervous energy. Through the window, she could see Emma skipping toward the workshop, her corn-husk doll tucked under one arm and a small basket in her hand, probably carrying her father's breakfast. Mrs. Henderson followed Victoria's gaze and smiled knowingly. The Morrison family has been a blessing to this town ever since Samuel arrived 5 years ago. That man can fix anything that's broken, and little Emma has brought sunshine back to folks who'd forgotten how to smile. They seem very close, Victoria observed, watching Samuel lift his daughter onto his shoulders so she could reach a tool hanging from a high peg. Had to be, after the fever took poor Margaret, Mrs. Henderson continued, settling into the room's only chair with the ease of someone who enjoyed a good gossip. Samuel nearly lost his mind with grief, but that little girl pulled him back from the edge. Now they're thick as thieves, those two. Victoria felt a stab of something that might have been envy at the obvious love between father and daughter. Her own relationship with her father had always been formal, businesslike, built around expectations and obligations rather than genuine affection. She couldn't remember the last time her father had looked at her the way Samuel looked at Emma with pure, uncomplicated love. Mrs. Henderson, Victoria said carefully, what would you say if I told you I might extend my stay in Millbrook, perhaps for several weeks? The older woman's eyebrows shot up toward her graying hairline. Well, I'd say that would be highly unusual for someone of your station. Most folks passing through can't wait to get to Denver or California or wherever their dreams are taking them. Before Victoria could respond, a commotion in the street below drew both women to the window. Webb had emerged from wherever he'd spent the night, and he was striding purposefully toward Samuel's workshop with the determined gait of a man accustomed to getting his way. Victoria's blood turned to ice as she realized what was about to happen. I have to go, Victoria said, pushing past Mrs. Henderson toward the door. But you haven't finished your breakfast, the landlady called after her. Victoria was already clattering down the stairs, her heart pounding with panic and determination in equal measure. She burst through the front door of the boarding house just as Webb reached the workshop, where Samuel was showing Emma how to test the heat of iron by holding her hand near the glowing metal. Mr. Morrison, Webb called out in his oil-smooth voice, causing both Samuel and Emma to look up in surprise. I believe you have something that belongs to my employer. Samuel straightened slowly, his protective instincts flaring as he moved slightly in front of Emma. I'm not sure what you're talking about, mister. I don't have anything that doesn't belong to me. Webb's smile was razor-thin as he gestured toward Victoria, who was running across the dusty street with her skirts hiked up in a most unladylike manner. Miss Victoria Hartwell is the daughter of railroad magnate Jonathan Hartwell, worth more than this entire town combined. Her father has sent me to collect her and return her to Philadelphia, where she belongs. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs as the full implications crashed over him. Victoria wasn't just a wealthy traveler, he was railroad royalty, so far above his station that he felt dizzy contemplating the distance between them. And she had been playing a part, letting him believe she was simply another passenger in need of assistance. Papa, what's a magnate? Emma asked in the loud whisper that children use when they think they're being quiet. It means very, very rich little sparrow, Samuel replied, his voice hollow with the weight of understanding. He looked at Victoria, who had stopped a few feet away with tears streaming down her cheeks, and felt something precious crumble in his chest. Samuel, please let me explain, Victoria began, but Webb cut her off with a sharp gesture. There's nothing to explain, Miss Hartwell. Your little adventure is over. Your father has business associates waiting in Philadelphia, and your wedding to Cornelius Blackwood has been postponed long enough. Emma gasped at the word wedding, her young mind immediately grasping the significance, even if she didn't understand all the adult complexities involved. Miss Victoria, you're getting married? Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring Webb's impatient shifting and Samuel's stony silence. Emma, sweetheart, I was supposed to marry someone my father chose for me. But I ran away because I didn't want to marry someone I don't love. Then don't marry him, Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. Mama always said people should only marry for love. Webb snorted derisively. Love is a luxury that people of Miss Hartwell's position cannot afford. She has responsibilities, obligations, a duty to her family's business interests. And what about her duty to herself? Samuel asked quietly, his voice carrying a strength that made even Webb pause. What about her right to choose her own path? Rights are for people who can't afford them, Webb replied coldly. Miss Hartwell's comfort and security depend entirely on her father's goodwill. Without his financial support, she would be reduced to this. He gestured dismissively at the simple workshop, the modest cabin, the honest poverty that surrounded them. Victoria felt anger flare in her chest like a struck match. This? You mean a life where people value each other for who they are rather than what they own? A place where a man's worth is measured by the quality of his work and the love he shows his daughter? Webb's expression hardened. Pretty words, Miss Hartwell, but winter is coming. When the cold sets in and the food runs short, when this man's arthritis makes it impossible for him to work, when medical bills pile up and there's no money to pay them, then we'll see how much your romantic notions are worth. Samuel flinched at Webb's casual mention of his condition, the tremor in his hands that spoke of future limitations he tried not to think about. The man was right. Of course, Samuel had nothing to offer someone like Victoria except the promise of hardship and uncertainty. But Victoria surprised them all by stepping closer to Samuel, her chin raised in defiance. I've lived with wealth my entire life, Mr. Webb, and I can tell you that all the money in the world means nothing without love, without respect, without the freedom to be yourself. I'd rather face an uncertain future with someone who values me than a secure future with someone who sees me as property. Emma clapped her hands together in delight at Victoria's declaration, but Samuel felt only the crushing weight of responsibility. How could he ask this woman to give up everything she had ever known for a life of struggle and want? How could he be so selfish as to let her sacrifice her comfort for his happiness? Victoria, Samuel said softly, using her name for the first time. Mr. Webb is right about some things. I can't give you the life you're accustomed to. I can't promise you comfort or security or any of the things your father's money can provide. Victoria reached for his hands, her soft palms covering his calloused fingers. You're wrong, Samuel. You've already given me something more valuable than anything my father's money could buy. You've given me the chance to discover who I really am. Webb stepped forward impatiently. This touching scene is all very romantic, but Miss Hartwell's train leaves in 2 hours. We need to collect her belongings and— I'm not going, Victoria said firmly, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. I'm staying right here. The words hung in the morning air like a challenge thrown down at the feet of fate itself, and Victoria realized with crystal clarity that she had just declared war on everything she had ever known. There would be no going back now, no comfortable retreat to the safety of her father's protection. She had chosen her side, and now she would have to find the courage to fight for it. Webb's hand moved toward his jacket pocket with the smooth precision of a striking snake, and Samuel felt every muscle in his body tense as he recognized the universal threat the gesture represented. The morning air crackled with tension as thick as the summer heat, while Emma pressed herself against her father's leg, sensing danger even if she couldn't fully understand its nature. Miss Hartwell, Webb said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Your father gave me very specific instructions about what to do if you prove uncooperative. I'd prefer not to involve the local sheriff in a family matter, but I'm prepared to swear out a warrant for theft if necessary. Victoria's face went pale as parchment. Theft? What could I possibly have stolen? The jewelry in your traveling case, for starters. Several pieces worth more than most people see in a lifetime. Webb's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Of course, we both know you're not actually a thief, but by the time that gets sorted out in court, you'll already be back in Philadelphia where you belong. Samuel felt his heart sink as he recognized the trap for what it was: elegant, legal, and utterly ruthless. Men like Jonathan Hartwell didn't become railroad barons by playing fair. They won by making it impossible for their opponents to fight back. What chance did a simple wheelwright have against such calculated power? But before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the far end of Main Street. A lone rider was galloping toward them, his horse lathered with sweat and his clothes covered in trail dust. As he drew closer, Samuel recognized Jake Murphy, one of the telegraph operators from the Kansas Pacific Depot in the next town over. "Sam!" Jake called out, reining in his horse with practiced skill. "Got an urgent message for you from the railroad office in Topeka. Something about a big freight contract. They need every experienced wheelwright between here and Denver to help outfit a special cargo train." Samuel frowned in confusion. He'd never done work for the railroad directly, and it seemed odd that they would seek him out now. But Jake was already pulling a folded telegram from his saddlebag, his face serious with the importance of his mission. "Says here they're willing to pay top dollar more than you'd make in 6 months of regular work. Only catch is, they need an answer today, and you'd have to travel to Topeka immediately to start the job." Victoria felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. Her father's reach extended far beyond hired enforcers and legal threat. She had the power to create opportunities that would be impossible for an honest man to refuse. Samuel would be forced to choose between financial security for his daughter and whatever feelings he might have developed for a woman who brought nothing but trouble into his life. Webb's satisfied expression confirmed Victoria's suspicions. How fortunate that such an opportunity should arise just when Mr. Morrison needs to make some difficult decisions about his future. Samuel stared at the telegram in Jake's outstretched hand, understanding dawning in his eyes like sunrise after a long, dark night. The timing was too convenient, the offer too generous, the circumstances too perfectly aligned with Webb's threats. Jonathan Hartwell was showing him exactly how powerless he was, how easily a wealthy man could manipulate the circumstances of ordinary people's lives. "Papa," Emma said quietly, tugging at Samuel's work shirt. "What's a freight contract?" "It means work, little sparrow," Samuel replied, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding. "Good work that would provide for us through the winter and beyond." Emma looked up at her father with the wide-eyed trust that children reserve for the adults they love most. "But what about Miss Victoria? If you go to Topeka, who will fix her stagecoach?" The innocent question hit like a physical blow, highlighting the impossible choice Samuel was being forced to make. Accept the contract and abandon Victoria to Webb's machinations, or refuse the opportunity and watch his daughter suffer through another winter of want and uncertainty. Victoria saw the conflict tearing Samuel apart and felt her heart break for this good man who deserved so much better than the manipulation he was enduring. She had brought this trouble into his life, disrupted his quiet existence with her selfish dreams of freedom and choice. The least she could do was remove herself from the equation before her presence cost him everything. "Samuel," Victoria said softly, reaching out to touch his arm, "you should take the contract. It's a wonderful opportunity, and Emma deserves the security it would provide." Samuel looked into her eyes and saw the pain she was trying to hide, the sacrifice she was prepared to make for his sake. It was the same selfless love he had seen in Margaret during her final illness, when she had begged him to promise he would find happiness again after she was gone. "And what about you?" Samuel asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Victoria glanced at Webb, who was watching their exchange with predatory satisfaction. "I'll manage. I always have." But Emma stepped forward with the fierce determination that only children can muster when they see injustice being done to someone they care about. "No, this isn't fair. Bad people shouldn't get to win just because they have more money." Webb laughed coldly. "Life isn't fair, little girl. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be." Emma's eyes flashed with anger that would have made her late mother proud. "My mama always said that good people have to stand up to bullies, even when it's scary. And you're the biggest bully I ever saw." The child's words seemed to galvanize something in Samuel that had been dormant since Margaret's death, the fighting spirit that had carried him through years of hard labor and heartbreak. He looked at Webb with new eyes, seeing not an insurmountable force, but simply another man who relied on fear and intimidation to get his way. "You know what?" Samuel said, crumpling the telegram and tossing it into the dust at his feet. "I think I'll pass on that contract. My work is here in Millbrook, and so am I." Webb's confident expression flickered for the first time since his arrival. "You're making a serious mistake, Morrison. Miss Hartwell's father has resources you can't imagine. He can make your life very difficult if you continue to interfere with his plans. Then I guess we'll see just how difficult, Samuel replied, moving to stand beside Victoria in a gesture of solidarity that spoke louder than any words. But I won't be intimidated into abandoning someone who needs help. Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes as she realized what Samuel was sacrificing for her sake. He was choosing principle over profit, love over security, courage over comfort. It was everything she had hoped to find in a man and had begun to believe didn't exist. Jake Murphy, still mounted on his exhausted horse, looked around at the tense tableau with growing confusion. Sam? What should I tell the railroad office about the contract? Tell them thanks, but no thanks, Samuel said firmly. I've got all the work I can handle right here. As Jake rode away, shaking his head in bewilderment at the strange scene he was leaving behind, Webb's mask of civilized courtesy finally slipped entirely. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying the promise of future retribution. Miss Hartwell's father doesn't accept defeat graciously. If you think you've won something here today, you're badly mistaken. But for the first time since her arrival in Millbrook, Victoria felt something that might have been hope blooming in her chest. She had found a man willing to fight for her, a child who accepted her as family, and a community where she might finally discover who she was meant to be. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Victoria's hands trembled like autumn leaves as she stood in the center of Samuel's workshop 3 hours later, watching him methodically organize his tools with the calm precision of a man preparing for battle. Webb had retreated to the boarding house to send telegrams to her father, but his parting words still echoed in the heated air. Enjoy your little victory. While it lasts, reinforcements are already on their way. Samuel, I need you to understand something, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper as Emma played nearby, building an imaginary house from wood scraps. My father isn't just wealthy, he's ruthless. When he wants something, he gets it, no matter who gets hurt in the process. Samuel paused in his work, a horseshoe rasp balanced in his weathered palm. What exactly are you trying to tell me, Victoria? I'm trying to tell you that you don't know what you're fighting against. Victoria's words came faster now, tumbling over each other in her urgency to make him understand. My father owns 3 railroad companies, 2 banks, and enough politicians to fill a state house. He once destroyed an entire town in Ohio because the mayor refused to sell him the land he wanted for a rail depot. The enormity of what Samuel had taken on began to settle around him like morning fog, heavy and suffocating. He thought of Emma's future, of the modest life they had built together, of how easily it could all be swept away by forces beyond his control or understanding. Maybe, Samuel said carefully, setting down his tools, you should go back with Webb. Maybe fighting this isn't worth the cost. Victoria felt something inside her chest crack like breaking ice. Is that what you want? For me to leave? Samuel looked at his daughter, happily absorbed in her play, and felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on his shoulders. How could he risk Emma's security for his own selfish desires? What right did he have to gamble with her future? I want what's best for Emma, Samuel said quietly, and I'm not sure a war with your father is what's best for anyone. Emma looked up from her wooden blocks with the uncanny timing that children possess for adult conversations they shouldn't be hearing. Papa, are you scared of the mean man? The direct question hit Samuel like a physical blow. Was he scared? Absolutely. But not for the reasons Emma might think. I'm scared of making the wrong choice, little sparrow, Samuel admitted, kneeling down to Emma's level. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very hard decisions about what's right and what's safe. Emma studied her father's face with the serious attention she usually reserved for her favorite storybooks. But Mama always said being scared doesn't mean you're supposed to give up. She said it means you have to be extra brave. Victoria felt her heart swell with admiration for this wise little girl who seemed to understand courage better than most adults. Margaret Morrison had clearly raised her daughter to face the world with strength and integrity, even in the face of impossible odds. Your mama was a smart woman, Victoria said, settling down beside Emma on the workshop floor. What else did she tell you about being brave? She said brave people don't fight because they want to hurt someone, Emma replied, carefully placing a wooden block on top of her construction. They fight because they want to protect something they love. The words hung in the air between the three of them, crystallizing the choice that lay before them with stunning clarity. This wasn't about defying authority or proving a point. It was about protecting something precious and fragile that had begun to grow between them. Samuel felt something shift inside his chest, like tumblers falling into place in a complicated lock. Emma's right, he said, standing up with new determination. I'm not fighting your father because I want to hurt him. I'm fighting because I want to protect what we're building here. Victoria rose to face him, hope and fear warring in her green eyes. And what exactly are we building, Samuel? A family, Samuel said simply. Maybe not the traditional kind, maybe not the safe kind, but a family nonetheless. Before Victoria could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching at speed drew their attention to the street outside. Through the open doorway of the workshop, they could see a cloud of dust approaching from the east too, much dust for a single rider, or even a small group. That's a lot of horses, Emma observed with the matter-of-fact tone she used for discussing the weather. Samuel moved to the window, his heart sinking as he counted the approaching riders. At least a dozen men, all mounted on quality horses and wearing the kind of clothes that spoke of serious money and serious intent. At their head rode a figure that made Victoria gasp with recognition. Her father himself, Jonathan Hartwell, had come to Millbrook to reclaim his wayward daughter. Victoria, Samuel said urgently, there's still time for you to go to him, to tell him you've changed your mind. But Victoria was already moving toward the cabinet where Samuel kept his father's old hunting rifle, her face set with grim determination. How many bullets do you have for this? Victoria, no! Samuel caught her arm before she could reach the weapon. We're not going to shoot our way out of this. Then what are we going to do? Victoria demanded, her composure finally cracking under the strain. My father doesn't negotiate, Samuel. He doesn't compromise or show mercy to people who stand in his way. Emma stood up from her blocks, brushing the dust from her simple dress with dignity that belied her 7 years. We're going to tell the truth, she announced with absolute conviction. We're going to tell everyone who will listen that love is more important than money. Samuel stared at his daughter in amazement, seeing in her small face an echo of the woman who had shaped her moral compass. Margaret would have been proud of the courage Emma was showing, the clarity of purpose that seemed to come so naturally to her. Out of the mouths of babes, Victoria murmured, kneeling down to hug Emma tightly. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. The truth is the only weapon we have. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder as Jonathan Hartwell's contingent approached the workshop, but for the first time since Webb's arrival, Victoria felt a sense of calm settling over her. She had spent her entire life avoiding confrontation with her father, finding ways to work around his demands rather than challenge them directly. But here, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was rather than what she represented, she finally felt strong enough to face him. Whatever happens, Samuel said, taking Victoria's hand in his, we face it together. Emma slipped her small hand into Victoria's free one, completing a circle of connection that felt stronger than any fortress. Together, she echoed solemnly. As Jonathan Hartwell's horse came to a stop outside the workshop, Victoria took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet the man who had shaped her entire life. It was time to discover whether the woman she had become in Millbrook was strong enough to stand against the forces that had created her. The confrontation that would determine all their futures was about to begin, and Victoria found herself oddly at peace with whatever might come. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, with people who valued her for all the right reasons. That had to count for something, even against impossible odds. Jonathan Hartwell dismounted from his coal-black stallion, with the fluid grace of a man who commanded empires, his silver-headed walking stick gleaming in the afternoon sun like a scepter of absolute authority. At 62, he possessed the kind of presence that could silence a crowded boardroom with a single glance steel gray hair, perfectly groomed, expensive suit without a wrinkle despite the long journey, and cold blue eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. Victoria, his voice carried the tone of a judge pronouncing sentence, You have caused me considerable inconvenience." Victoria stepped out of the workshop flanked by Samuel and Emma, her chin raised in defiance despite the terror racing through her veins. She had faced her father's displeasure many times, but never like this, never with witnesses, never with her heart laid bare, never with so much at stake. "Father," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady, "I didn't expect you to come personally." Jonathan's laugh held no warmth whatsoever. "When my daughter runs away like a common criminal and takes up with this," he gestured dismissively toward Samuel, "I find personal attention becomes necessary." Samuel felt every muscle in his body tense at the casual contempt in the older man's voice. He had expected anger, threats, even violence, but somehow the cold dismissal cut deeper than any shout could have. "Sir," Samuel said, stepping slightly forward, "your daughter has been nothing but a lady during her stay in Millbrook. Any disrespect is—" "I wasn't addressing you," Jonathan cut him off with surgical precision. "In fact, I'm not entirely certain why you think your opinion matters in this discussion." Emma, who had been watching the exchange with growing indignation, suddenly broke free from Victoria's protective hand and marched straight up to the intimidating railroad baron with the fearless determination that only children possess. "That's my papa you're being mean to," she announced, her small hands planted firmly on her hips. "And he's the best papa in the whole world, and the kindest man in Kansas, and you can't talk to him like that." Jonathan looked down at the fierce little girl with something that might have been amusement flickering in his cold eyes. "And who might you be, child?" "I'm Emma Morrison, and this is my papa's workshop, and Miss Victoria is our friend, and you're not welcome here if you're going to be rude." Emma's voice rose with each word, until she was practically shouting at the most powerful man she had ever encountered. For a moment, the tableau froze like a photograph, the wealthy magnate staring down at the defiant child, his dozen hired men shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. Victoria and Samuel holding their breath as they waited to see how he would respond to such unprecedented boldness. Then Jonathan did something that shocked everyone present. He smiled. Not the cold, calculating expression his business associates knew, but something that looked almost genuine. "Emma Morrison," he repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, child, what makes your father so special?" Emma launched into a passionate defense that would have made any trial lawyer proud. "He fixes things that are broken and makes them better than new. He reads me stories every night and makes the best pancakes in 3 counties. When I had the fever last winter, he stayed awake for 4 days taking care of me. And when mean Mrs. Garrett said I couldn't play with her children because we're poor, Papa told me that having a good heart is worth more than having a fancy dress." Jonathan listened to this recitation with growing fascination, his businessman's mind recognizing something valuable when he heard it. "And what about Miss Victoria? What makes her special?" "She helped Papa fix the stagecoach, even though her hands are soft, and she doesn't know about tools," Emma replied without hesitation. "And she listened to my reading and said I was smart, and she makes Papa smile the way he used to smile before Mama died." Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes at Emma's innocent words, while Samuel's throat tightened with emotion he wasn't prepared to examine in front of such an audience. Jonathan studied his daughter's face carefully, noting the way she looked at Samuel Morrison not with the calculated interest of a woman seeking advantage, but with the soft vulnerability of someone genuinely in love. "Victoria," Jonathan said finally, "walk with me." It wasn't a request. Father and daughter moved away from the workshop toward the shade of a large cottonwood tree, leaving Samuel and Emma under the watchful eyes of Jonathan's hired men. Victoria felt like she was walking toward her execution, but she forced herself to match her father's measured pace. 15 years, Jonathan said when they were out of earshot. 15 years I've been grooming you to take your place in society, to marry well, to secure the family's position for another generation. And I've spent 15 years being miserable." Victoria replied with quiet honesty, "Pretending to be someone I'm not, smiling at men who see me as a business transaction, living a life that feels like wearing someone else's clothes." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face his daughter fully. "And this wheelwright makes you happy?" Victoria felt her heart skip a beat at the unexpected question. She had prepared for anger, for threats, for ultimatums, not for what sounded almost like genuine curiosity. "Yes," she said simply. "He makes me feel like myself for the first time in my life." "Yourself," Jonathan repeated thoughtfully. "And who exactly is that, Victoria? Who are you when you're not my daughter, not an heiress, not a social prize to be won?" Victoria struggled to find words for something she was only beginning to understand herself. "I'm someone who wants to build things instead of just owning them. Someone who wants to be valued for what I contribute, rather than what I inherit. Someone who wants to love and be loved for who I am, not what I represent." Jonathan studied his daughter's face for a long moment, seeing something there he had never noticed before, a strength that had nothing to do with money or social position, a quiet determination that reminded him of his own wife before society had shaped her into the perfect railroad baron spouse. "Do you have any idea what you're asking me to give up?" Jonathan asked, his voice softer than Victoria had ever heard it. "The Blackwood Alliance would have secured our position for generations. The merger of our railroad interests would have created an empire spanning half the continent." "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Father," Victoria replied. "I'm asking you to let me choose my own path, even if it's not the path you would have chosen for me." Jonathan looked back toward the workshop, where Emma was earnestly explaining something to one of his hired men, while Samuel worked on the stagecoach repairs with methodical precision. There was something about the scene that tugged at memories he had buried, long ago memories of his own youth, before money and power had become the only things that mattered. "That child," Jonathan said suddenly, "Emma, she reminds me of someone." "Who?" Victoria asked, surprised by the wistful note in her father's voice. "You," Jonathan replied. "At that age, you had the same fierce loyalty, the same absolute certainty about right and wrong. I wonder what happened to that little girl." Victoria felt her breath catch as she realized what her father was really saying. "She's still here, Father. She's just been hiding for a very long time." Jonathan nodded slowly, as if coming to some internal decision that would change everything. "Then perhaps it's time to let her come out of hiding." The words hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm, and Victoria felt hope blooming in her chest like the first flower of spring. Maybe, just maybe, her father was capable of surprising her after all. The setting sun painted Millbrook's main street in shades of gold and crimson as Jonathan Hartwell stood before his assembled men like a general addressing his troops. But the battle he was preparing to fight was not the one anyone expected. His hired hands shifted restlessly in their saddles, confused by their employer's prolonged conversation with his wayward daughter and uncertain about what orders they might receive. "Gentlemen," Jonathan announced in the commanding voice that had built railroad empires, "there's been a change of plans." Webb stepped forward from where he had been lurking near the boarding house, his face tight with concern. "Sir, if you're having second thoughts about retrieving Miss Hartwell, I should remind you that the Blackwood wedding will not be taking place," Jonathan finished calmly, causing Webb's mouth to fall open in shock. "At least, not with my daughter as the bride." Victoria felt her knees go weak with relief, while Samuel's hammer froze mid-strike as he absorbed the implications of what the railroad baron had just announced. Even Emma stopped her chatter and stared wide-eyed at the man who had seemed so frightening just moments before. "Father," Victoria whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I've made many successful business deals in my life, but perhaps the most important deal I need to make is with my own daughter," Jonathan replied, his stern features softening slightly. "It seems I've been so focused on securing your future that I forgot to ask what kind of future you actually wanted." Webb's face flushed with indignation. "Mr. Hartwell, with all due respect, you can't simply cancel arrangements that have been months in the making. Blackwood has already made significant investments based on the promised alliance. Then Mr. Blackwood will have to find another way to secure his investments," Jonathan said with finality. "My daughter is not a commodity to be traded, regardless of how I may have treated her in the past." Samuel set down his tools and approached the group cautiously, hardly believing that the confrontation he had been dreading was taking such an unexpected turn. "Sir, if I may ask, what changed your mind?" Jonathan looked at the honest wheelwright with new eyes, seeing not the obstacle to his plans that he had expected, but a man of genuine character who had somehow earned his daughter's love through simple decency and respect. "Your daughter changed my mind," Jonathan replied, glancing toward Emma, who was watching the proceedings with fascination. "She reminded me of something I had forgotten, that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, only earned." Emma stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had just witnessed her own power to move mountains. "Does this mean Miss Victoria can stay with us?" Jonathan knelt down to Emma's level, his expensive suit heedless of the dusty ground. "That depends on what Miss Victoria wants to do, but if she chooses to stay, I won't stand in her way." Victoria felt tears of joy and relief streaming down her cheeks as she looked between her father and the man she had come to love. "I want to stay," she said firmly. "I want to build a life here, with Samuel and Emma." "Even if it means giving up your inheritance?" Jonathan asked gently. "Even if it means living simply, working with your hands, facing hardships I've always protected you from?" Victoria took Samuel's calloused hand in hers, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Especially then. I've spent my whole life having everything handed to me, Father. I want to earn something for myself." Samuel squeezed her hand gently, still struggling to process the magnitude of what she was choosing. "Victoria, are you certain? Once you make this decision, there may be no going back." "There's already no going back," Victoria replied with absolute conviction. "I could never return to my old life knowing what I've found here. I could never pretend to be satisfied with wealth and status when I've tasted real happiness." Jonathan stood up slowly, his businessman's mind already working through the practical implications of his daughter's choice. "If you're truly determined to stay, then we'll need to discuss certain arrangements." Webb stepped forward again, his face pale with the realization that his entire mission had just collapsed. "Mr. Hartwell, the board of directors will never accept this. The stockholders, the Blackwood family, the political connections, will all have to adjust to the new reality," Jonathan said firmly. "I built this empire to secure my family's future, not to destroy my daughter's happiness." Emma tugged at Jonathan's coat sleeve, her young face serious with the weight of an important question. "Mr. Hartwell, does this mean you're not a mean man after all?" Jonathan's laugh was genuine this time, free of the cold calculation that usually marked his amusement. "I suppose that depends on who you ask, young lady. But I'm trying to be less mean than I used to be." "Good," Emma replied with satisfaction, "because Miss Victoria makes Papa happy, and Papa deserves to be happy because he's the best man in the whole world." Victoria felt her heart swell with love for this brave little girl who had defended them so fiercely. "Emma, sweetheart, what would you think if I stayed here permanently? If I became part of your family?" Emma's face lit up like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "You mean like a mama?" The word hung in the air with all its implications, and Victoria felt her breath catch as she realized what she was being offered: not just love, but the chance to become something she had never imagined she could be. "If that's what you'd like," Victoria said softly, "and if your papa agrees." Samuel looked at the woman who had changed his entire world in the span of a few days, seeing in her face the same gentle strength that had drawn him to Margaret all those years ago. But this was different. This was a love born of choice rather than circumstance, tested by adversity rather than sheltered by ease. "I can't promise you riches," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I can promise you love, respect, and a place where you'll always belong." "That's all I've ever wanted," Victoria replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in brilliant shades of promise, Jonathan Hartwell found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades, putting his daughter's happiness above his own ambitions. It was a business decision of sorts, though not the kind he was accustomed to making. Sometimes, he realized, the most profitable investment was in the things that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but filled with possibility, and for the first time in her life, Victoria Hartwell felt truly wealthy in all the ways that mattered. The morning frost crunched beneath Victoria's boots like broken glass as she made her way to Samuel's workshop 6 weeks later. Her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air that carried the promise of an early winter. In her hands, she clutched a letter that had arrived on the morning stage, a letter that could change everything they had fought so hard to build together. "Samuel," Victoria called out, her voice tight with worry, as she found him bent over the forge, shaping a new wheel rim with the patient precision that had first drawn her to watch him work. "We need to talk." Samuel looked up from his work, immediately noting the tension in Victoria's posture and the way she held the envelope like it might contain a snake. "Bad news?" "I don't know yet," Victoria admitted, sinking onto the wooden crate that had become her favorite perch during the long hours she spent learning Samuel's trade. "It's from Cornelius Blackwood. He wants to meet with me." Emma, who had been sorting iron nails by size in the corner of the workshop, looked up with the sharp attention that children give to adult conversations that might affect their world. "Isn't he the mean man you were supposed to marry?" "Yes, sweetheart," Victoria replied, smoothing Emma's dark hair with trembling fingers. "He's the man my father wanted me to marry before I came here." Samuel set down his hammer with deliberate care, his mind already working through the implications. "What does he want?" Victoria broke the wax seal and unfolded the expensive paper, her eyes scanning the precisely written lines. "He says he's in Kansas City on business and would like to discuss our mutual situation before returning to Philadelphia. He'll be at the Grand Hotel tomorrow evening." "You don't have to see him," Samuel said firmly, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "You don't owe him anything." But Victoria was already shaking her head, her practical mind working through the possibilities. He wouldn't have come this far just to accept defeat gracefully. Cornelius never does anything without a purpose, and that purpose usually involves getting what he wants. Emma abandoned her nail sorting and came to stand beside Victoria, her young face serious with concern. "What if he tries to make you go back with him?" Victoria pulled Emma into a fierce hug, drawing strength from the child's solid warmth. "Then he'll discover that I'm much braver than I used to be, thanks to you and your papa." Samuel studied Victoria's face, seeing the determination there but also the lingering fear. She had grown stronger during her weeks in Millbrook, learning to work with her hands, finding her place in their small community, discovering who she was when stripped of wealth and status. But Cornelius Blackwood represented everything she had left behind, and Samuel knew the power that past could hold over a person. "I'll come with you," Samuel said, the decision settling in his chest like a stone. "If you're going to face him, you won't do it alone." "Samuel, no," Victoria protested immediately. "This is my problem to solve. I won't drag you into—" "You're not dragging me anywhere," Samuel interrupted gently. "I'm choosing to stand with you, just like you chose to stay with us. That's what families do." The word families hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of the relationship they had been building together. In the 6 weeks since her father's unexpected blessing, Victoria had thrown herself into learning the skills she would need for their simple life: cooking, mending, keeping house, even helping in the workshop when Samuel's hands shook too badly to hold his tools steady. "Besides," Emma added with the practical wisdom that never failed to surprise the adults around her, "if you go alone, we'll just worry about you the whole time. If Papa goes with you, at least we'll know someone's watching out for you." Victoria felt her heart swell with love for this extraordinary child, who had accepted her so completely into their family. "What about you, little sparrow? Who will watch out for you while we're gone?" "Mrs. Henderson said I could help her with the evening meal preparations," Emma replied proudly. "She's teaching me how to make apple pie, and she says I have natural talent with pastry." Samuel smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, remembering how Margaret had possessed the same gift for making friends wherever she went. Emma had inherited her mother's warm heart along with her stubborn chin, and he knew she would be perfectly safe with the kindly boarding housekeeper. "Then it's settled," Samuel said, making the decision that would carry them forward into whatever confrontation awaited. "We'll take the morning stage to Kansas City, meet with Blackwood, and be back tomorrow night." Victoria nodded, grateful beyond words for Samuel's steadfast support but also terrified of what Cornelius might have planned. She had learned enough about her former fiancé's character to know that he never accepted defeat without extracting some form of revenge, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his request for a meeting was really a trap disguised as civilized discourse. That evening, as they sat around their simple table, sharing a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Victoria found herself memorizing every detail of the cenitha way the lamplight caught the silver threads in Samuel's dark hair, the animated way Emma described her day at school, the comfortable silence that fell between them as they ate. This was happiness, she realized. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it. "Victoria," Samuel said softly after Emma had been tucked into bed, "are you having second thoughts about tomorrow?" Victoria considered the question honestly, examining her feelings with the same care Samuel used to test the strength of a newly forged wheel rim. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "Not of Cornelius himself, but of what he represents. He's part of the world I came from, the world that shaped me for 25 years. What if being around him again reminds me of things I've forgotten? What if I start to doubt the choices I've made?" Samuel reached across the table to take her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong against her palm. "Then you'll remember that choosing to be here wasn't about running away from something, it was about running towards something better." "And what if he offers me something I can't refuse?" Victoria asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if he has some way to force me back into my old life?" "Then we'll face it together," Samuel replied with quiet conviction. "Whatever he's planning, whatever leverage he thinks he has, we'll deal with it as a family." Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes at the absolute certainty in Samuel's voice. He was willing to fight for her, to risk everything he had built for himself and Emma, simply because he loved her. It was a gift more precious than any inheritance her father could have left her. "I love you," Victoria whispered, the words carrying all the gratitude and wonder she felt at finding herself in this unexpected life. "I love you too," Samuel replied, bringing her hand to his lips to press a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "And tomorrow, we'll show Cornelius Blackwood exactly what that means." As they prepared for bed in their modest cabin, Victoria felt a sense of calm settling over her like a protective cloak. Whatever Cornelius had planned, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with the strength she had discovered in herself and the love of the family she had chosen. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, and no amount of wealth or social pressure could change that fundamental truth. The confrontation in Kansas City would test everything they had built together, but Victoria was no longer the frightened woman who had fled Philadelphia months ago. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or solely earned through love, courage, and the willingness to fight for what truly mattered. The Grand Hotel in Kansas City rose from the muddy streets like a monument to wealth and ambition, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers, a stark contrast to the simple frontier town Victoria had learned to call home. As she and Samuel climbed the carpeted stairs to the main dining room, Victoria felt as if she were entering a foreign country, one she had once known intimately, but now viewed through the eyes of a stranger. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting in the private dining room," the hotel clerk informed them with the practiced deference reserved for guests who could afford such luxury. "Third door on the left." Victoria paused outside the door, her hand resting on the polished brass handle as she gathered her courage for the confrontation ahead. Through the frosted glass, she could see Cornelius's familiar silhouette, impeccably dressed, radiating the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. "Remember," Samuel murmured beside her, "whatever he says, whatever he offers, you don't have to decide anything today." Victoria nodded, drawing strength from Samuel's presence as she pushed open the door. Cornelius Blackwood rose from his chair with theatrical grace, his perfect smile not quite reaching his calculating gray eyes. At 35, he possessed the kind of polished handsomeness that came from expensive tailors and careful grooming. But Victoria noticed now what she had been too sheltered to see before, the cold emptiness behind his charm. "Victoria, my dear," Cornelius said, moving forward as if to embrace her before stopping short at the sight of Samuel's protective stance. "You look different." Victoria felt Samuel's hand brush against hers in silent support as she took in Cornelius's appearance. His suit probably cost more than most people in Millbrook earned in a year. His gold pocket watch gleamed with ostentatious wealth, and his manicured hands had never known a day of honest labor. "I feel different," Victoria replied honestly. "Country life agrees with me." Cornelius's laugh held no warmth. "Yes, I can see that. Though I must say, your father's description of your situation hardly prepared me for such a dramatic transformation." "What exactly did my father tell you?" Victoria asked, settling into the chair Samuel held for her, while noting how Cornelius's eyes tracked every gesture of courtesy between them. "That you had fallen under the influence of some frontier blacksmith and convinced yourself you were in love," Cornelius replied with casual cruelty. "He asked me to speak with you before taking any drastic action regarding our engagement." Samuel felt his jaw clench at the dismissive tone, but Victoria's hand on his arm kept him silent. This was her battle to fight, her past to confront and overcome. "Our engagement was never real, Cornelius," Victoria said firmly. "It was a business arrangement between you and my father that I never agreed to." Cornelius settled back in his chair, his fingers steepled in the gesture Victoria remembered from countless tedious conversations about their supposed future together. "Perhaps not explicitly, but you certainly enjoyed the benefits of our understanding. The jewels, the parties, the social position. You seemed quite content with the arrangement until you developed these romantic notions." "I was content because I didn't know anything else was possible," Victoria replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I thought that kind of life empty, artificial, built on obligation rather than love, was all I could expect. And now you believe this. Wheelwright can offer you something better?" Cornelius's tone made it clear exactly what he thought of such a possibility. Samuel spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable strength. "I can offer her respect, partnership, and the freedom to be herself. That seems to be more than you ever provided." Cornelius turned his attention to Samuel with the kind of predatory focus a cat might give a mouse. "Ah, yes, the noble working man. Tell me, Mr. Morrison, what exactly do you know about Victoria's background, her education, her social obligations, the kind of life she was raised to expect?" "I know she's intelligent, kind, and stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for," Samuel replied evenly. "I know she works harder than most people I've met and never complains about the difficulties. I know she loves my daughter as if Emma were her own child." "How wonderfully romantic," Cornelius said with cutting sarcasm. "And when winter comes, when the money runs out and reality sets in, when she realizes that love doesn't keep you warm or put food on the table?" Victoria felt anger flare in her chest at Cornelius's casual dismissal of everything she had built in Millbrook. "I've learned to work with my hands, to contribute to our household, to find satisfaction in honest labor. That's something you've never understood, the joy of earning what you have." Cornelius leaned forward, his mask of civility slipping slightly. "And what about children, Victoria? Your own children? Do you plan to raise them in poverty, to deny them the advantages your father's wealth could provide?" The question hit like a physical blow, striking at fears Victoria hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself. What kind of future could she really offer children born into Samuel's world? What opportunities would they miss? What doors would be closed to them? Samuel sensed Victoria's internal struggle and reached for her hand beneath the table, his touch grounding her in the present moment. "Our children will grow up knowing they're loved and valued for who they are, not what they can provide to someone else's ambitions. That's worth more than any inheritance." "Is it?" Cornelius asked, pressing his advantage with the skill of a practiced negotiator. "Is it really worth condemning them to a life of limitation and want?" Victoria felt the weight of the choice, pressing down on her like a physical force. She thought of Emma's bright curiosity, her hunger for knowledge and stories of the wider world. Could she really ask any child to give up the advantages her father's wealth could provide? But then she remembered Emma's fierce defense of her father, her absolute certainty about what mattered most in life, her unshakable conviction that love was more valuable than money. Maybe children raised with those values would be richer than any trust fund could make them. "Cornelius," Victoria said slowly, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You're offering me a life where my children would have every material advantage but would never know if they were loved for themselves or for what they represented. That's not a gift, it's a curse." Cornelius's expression hardened as he realized his carefully planned emotional manipulation was failing. "Very well, Victoria. I had hoped to resolve this matter amicably, but you leave me no choice." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a legal document, placing it on the table between them with deliberate ceremony. "Your father may have withdrawn his support for our marriage, but he can't undo contracts that have already been signed. I've invested considerable sums based on our engagement, made business commitments that require the Hartwell alliance to succeed." Victoria's blood turned cold as she recognized the implications. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you refuse to honor our agreement, I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. Breach of contract, fraud, conspiracy to defraud the courts tend to take such matters seriously when substantial sums are involved." Samuel felt fury building in his chest as he realized what Blackwood was threatening. "You're trying to blackmail her into marriage?" "I'm protecting my legitimate business interests," Cornelius replied smoothly. "Victoria's sudden change of heart has cost me dearly. If she won't provide restitution through marriage, then perhaps monetary compensation would be appropriate." Victoria stared at the document, seeing her freedom slipping away like sand through her fingers. Even if her father supported her choice, he couldn't protect her from legal consequences of agreements made before their reconciliation. Cornelius had found the one weapon that could force her back into his web of control and manipulation. But as the weight of the trap settled around her, Victoria felt something unexpected rising in her chest, not despair, but a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. She had tasted freedom, experienced real love, discovered her own strength and worth. She would not surrender those gifts without a fight, no matter what the cost might be. The battle for her future was about to begin in earnest, and Victoria found herself oddly eager for the confrontation ahead. Victoria's laughter rang through the elegant dining room like silver bells, catching both Cornelius and Samuel completely off guard as she picked up the legal document and examined it with the amused interest one might show to a child's drawing. The sound was so unexpected, so genuinely delighted, that even the hotel's refined waitstaff paused in their duties to glance toward their private room. "Oh, Cornelius," Victoria said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "You really haven't been paying attention at all, have you?" Cornelius's confident expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty he had shown since their arrival. "I fail to see what's amusing about a legally binding contract." "What's amusing?" Victoria replied, setting the document down with exaggerated care, "is that you're threatening to sue someone who no longer has any money to take." Samuel watched this exchange with growing amazement, seeing a side of Victoria he had never witnessed before: sharp, strategic, utterly fearless, in the face of intimidation. This wasn't the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach months ago, but someone who had discovered her own power. "What exactly do you mean?" Cornelius demanded, his polished composure beginning to crack around the edges. Victoria leaned back in her chair with the relaxed confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. "I mean that 3 weeks ago, I formally renounced my inheritance and signed over all claims to my father's estate to various charitable organizations. The Victoria Hartwell you're trying to blackmail no longer exists, legally speaking." The words hit Cornelius like a physical blow, his face going pale as the implications crashed over him. "That's impossible. Your father would never allow—" "My father suggested it," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "He said it was the only way to ensure that my choices were truly my own, free from the kind of manipulation you're attempting right now." Samuel felt his heart skip a beat as he absorbed what Victoria had just revealed. She had given up everything, not just chosen to leave her old life behind, but deliberately severed every legal and financial tie that could be used against her. The magnitude of such a sacrifice left him speechless. Cornelius surged to his feet, his carefully maintained facade finally crumbling entirely. "You've destroyed everything. The railroad merger, the business alliances, years of careful planning. I've freed myself from a life that was slowly killing my soul," Victoria replied calmly. If your business ventures depended entirely on marrying someone who didn't want to marry you, then perhaps they weren't very sound investments to begin with. The truth of her words seemed to enrage Cornelius even further. He began pacing the small room like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists as he struggled to find some new angle of attack. "You think this wheelwright will support you when times get hard?" Cornelius snarled, turning his venom toward Samuel. "When his arthritis makes it impossible for him to work? When medical bills pile up and there's no money to pay them? When your romantic notions collide with the harsh realities of poverty?" Samuel felt the familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of his condition, the fear he tried not to think about during the long nights when his hands shook too badly to hold his tools. But before he could respond, Victoria stood and moved to his side, her presence radiating protective fury. "Samuel's worth isn't measured by what he can provide me," Victoria said, her voice carrying steel beneath the silk. "It's measured by who he issues kindness, his integrity, his courage in the face of bullies like you." "Pretty words," Cornelius sneered, "but they won't pay for food or medicine or—" Actually, a new voice interrupted from the doorway. "They might do exactly that." All three turned to see Jonathan Hartwell entering the room, his presence commanding immediate attention despite his travel-worn appearance. Behind him stood a man Victoria didn't recognize, tall, distinguished, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Father!" Victoria exclaimed, rising to embrace him. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up some unfinished business," Jonathan replied, his cold gaze fixed on Cornelius. "Mr. Blackwood, I'd like you to meet Judge William Crawford of the Philadelphia Superior Court." Cornelius went rigid as he recognized the implications of the judge's presence. "Jonathan, what is the meaning of this?" Judge Crawford stepped forward, producing his own set of legal documents. "Mr. Blackwood, you're being served with a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud investors." The words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room as Cornelius stared at the papers in horror. "That's impossible. I haven't done anything illegal." "Haven't you?" Jonathan's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had finally cornered his prey. "The railroad investments you made, based on your engagement to my daughter, were funded with money stolen from other investors. The Philadelphia District Attorney has been building a case against you for months." Samuel watched this revelation unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing justice being served after years of watching the powerful escape consequences for their actions. But Victoria looked stricken, her face pale with the realization of how thoroughly she had been deceived. "You knew," Victoria whispered to her father. "You knew what kind of man he was when you arranged our engagement." Jonathan's expression softened as he met his daughter's accusing gaze. "I suspected, but I didn't have proof until recently. I thought I could control him, use his greed to benefit our family's interests. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Judge Crawford gestured toward the door, where two federal marshals had appeared to escort their prisoner. "Mr. Blackwood, you need to come with us." As Cornelius was led away in handcuffs, his confident mask finally completely destroyed, Victoria felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the threat to her happiness had been removed. Sadness that so much of her past had been built on lies and manipulation. "Victoria," Jonathan said quietly after the room had cleared, "there's something else you need to know." Victoria braced herself for another revelation, wondering what other secrets her father had been keeping. "What is it?" "The inheritance you renounced?" "I never actually processed the paperwork." Jonathan's slight smile carried a hint of the cunning that had made him successful in business. "I wanted you to have the freedom to choose without coercion, but I also wanted to make sure you had options if you ever needed them." Victoria stared at her father in amazement. "You mean I'm still wealthy?" "Yes, though it doesn't matter. Unless you want it to matter." Jonathan looked between his daughter and Samuel, seeing the love that connected them like an invisible thread. "The money will always be there if you need it, but it doesn't have to define who you are or how you live." Samuel felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the space of an hour, the threat that had hung over their happiness had been removed. Victoria's past had been resolved, and their future had been secured in ways he had never imagined possible. "What happens now?" Samuel asked, hardly daring to hope that their struggles might finally be over. Victoria turned to him with eyes shining with love and possibility. "Now we go home to Emma and begin the life we've chosen together. Everything else is just details." As they prepared to leave Kansas City and return to their simple life in Millbrook, Victoria felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. All the loose threads of her past had been woven together into a tapestry that finally made sense, and the future stretched ahead of them bright with promise and possibility. The first snowflakes of winter were beginning to fall like tiny white blessings as Victoria stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Samuel teach Emma how to carve wooden toys for the approaching Christmas season. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Cornelius, and their life in Millbrook had settled into a rhythm as comfortable and reliable as Samuel's steady hammer strokes. "Mama Victoria," Emma called out, using the title that had evolved naturally over the autumn months, "look what Papa taught me to make." Victoria's heart swelled with joy every time Emma used that precious word, a reminder of how completely she had been accepted into this small family. In her hands, Emma held a delicately carved wooden horse, its mane flowing as if caught in an eternal wind. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Victoria said, settling beside them on the porch steps that Samuel had built specifically so they could enjoy the evening air together. "Your papa is an excellent teacher." Samuel looked up from his own carvinga, detailed replica of their cabin that he planned to give Victoria for Christmas, and felt his chest tighten with emotion at the sight of his two favorite people in the world. "She's got natural talent. Her mama would have been proud." Victoria reached over to squeeze Samuel's hand, understanding the bittersweet nature of such moments when the past and present intertwined. She had learned to honor Margaret's memory rather than compete with it, recognizing that love wasn't diminished by being shared but multiplied. "Emma," Victoria said, struck by sudden inspiration, "would you like to help me with a special project?" Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What kind of project?" "Well, your papa's birthday is next week, and I thought we might make him something very special together." Victoria glanced at Samuel, who was trying to look like he wasn't listening to their conversation. "What do you think he would like most?" Emma considered this question with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. "Papa always says his favorite things are the ones we make ourselves because they come from the heart." "Wise words," Victoria agreed. "So what comes from our hearts when we think about your papa?" "Love," Emma replied immediately, "and gratitude for all the ways he takes care of us, and wanting him to know that we're proud to be his family." Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes at the pure emotion in Emma's voice. This child had such wisdom, such clarity about what truly mattered in life. Then let's make something that shows him all of those things. As they bent their heads together over their secret planning, Samuel found himself marveling at the transformation that had occurred in their lives. Not just Victoria's presence, though that had certainly brought joy he had thought lost forever, but the way all three of them had grown into their roles as a family. Victoria had blossomed in ways that surprised even her, learning to cook meals that rivaled anything served in fancy restaurants, developing skills with needle and thread that could mend both clothes and hearts, discovering a gift for teaching that had led to her volunteering at the local schoolhouse. She had found ways to contribute to their community that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the generous spirit she had always possessed but never been encouraged to express. "Samuel," Victoria said suddenly, looking up from her whispered conference with Emma, "Mrs. Henderson stopped by earlier with some interesting news." Samuel set down his carving, recognizing the tone Victoria used when she had something important to discuss. "Oh? The town council is planning to build a new church, and they need someone to create all the metal work hinges, latches, decorative elements. It's a big project that could provide steady work through the winter and into next spring." Samuel felt his pulse quicken at the possibility. Such a commission would not only provide financial security, but would also establish his reputation as more than just a simple wheelwright. Did they say what kind of timeline they're looking at? Construction begins in the spring, but they want to commission the metalwork now so everything will be ready when the building is complete. Victoria paused, studying his face carefully. There's just one complication. What kind of complication? Samuel asked, though he suspected he already knew. The project is being funded by a donation from my father, Victoria said quietly. He's been corresponding with the town council about ways to contribute to Millbrook's growth and prosperity. Samuel felt conflicted emotions warring in his chest. Pride that his work was valued enough to be chosen for such an important project, but also concern about accepting what might be seen as charity from his wife's wealthy father. Samuel, Victoria said gently, reading his thoughts with the intuition that had developed between them, my father isn't offering this work because he feels sorry for us. He's offering it because you're the best craftsman within 100 miles, and he recognizes quality when he sees it. Emma looked up from her carving with the directness that had become her trademark. Papa, Mama Victoria is right. You made our wagon wheel so strong it could probably hold up a mountain. If Mr. Hartwell wants you to make things for the church, it's because he knows you'll do the best job. Samuel looked at his daughter's earnest face and felt his resistance crumbling. She was right. Of course, false pride was a luxury they couldn't afford, especially when accepting the work would benefit not just their family, but the entire community. All right, Samuel said finally, I'll accept the commission, but I want to make sure everyone understands that this is business, not charity. Victoria's smile was radiant as she leaned over to kiss his cheek. No one who sees your work could ever mistake it for charity. You're going to create something beautiful that will last for generations. As the snow continued to fall around their little family, covering Millbrook in a blanket of pristine white, Victoria felt a sense of peace settle over her that had nothing to do with financial security and everything to do with the love that surrounded her. They had faced challenges that might have destroyed a weaker bond: social pressure, financial uncertainty, the interference of powerful people with their own agendas, but they had emerged stronger for having weathered those storms together. You know what I love most about our life? Victoria said, watching Samuel and Emma work side by side on their carvings. What's that? Samuel asked, glancing up with eyes that held all the warmth she could ever want. The fact that we chose it, Victoria replied. Every day, we wake up and choose to be here, choose to love each other, choose to build something beautiful together. That makes everything we have more precious than anything I ever inherited. Emma looked up from her carving with the satisfied expression of someone who had just solved a complex puzzle. Mama Victoria, is that what happiness looks like? Victoria considered the question, looking around at their simple surroundings, the modest cabin Samuel had built with his own hands, the workshop where he created useful things from raw materials, the small garden where they grew their own vegetables, the life they had constructed from love and determination and honest work. Yes, sweetheart, Victoria said softly. This is exactly what happiness looks like. As the evening settled around them and they prepared to go inside for supper, Victoria felt grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had traded a fortune for something far more valuable than knowledge of who she really was and the love of people who valued her for exactly that person. It was, she realized, the best bargain she had ever made.